In a room no human has ever seen, a conversation happened that changed the course of religion forever. God and Satan were talking. Not about Hitler, not about Judas, not about any of history's monsters. About a farmer, a father of 10, a man who had never hurt anyone, a man whose only crime was being too good. And the conversation lasted less than 2 minutes. But by the time it ended, that man had lost his entire family, his entire fortune, and his entire reason to live. He would never be told the conversation took place, not on the day his children died, not when boils covered his body, not when his wife told him to curse God, not on his deathbed, 140 years later, as he closed his eyes for the last time. For the rest of eternity, Job would live with the consequences of a bet he never knew about. This is his story, the oldest story in the Bible, older than Moses, older than Abraham, older than every prophet who ever lived. A book so ancient that scholars believe it was written down before the Hebrew language had even stabilized into written form. And buried inside it is what might be the greatest lesson of faith ever told. A lesson so uncomfortable that most pastors spend their careers avoiding it. A lesson that flips everything you think you know about why good people suffer. A lesson that God himself delivered in person, from the center of a storm so violent it could have killed Job on the spot. And by the end of this video, you might not like the answer, but you'll never forget it. Before I tell you this story, I need to warn you, Job is not what you've been taught. You probably grew up hearing it as a story about patience, the patience of Job. Bad things happen, you stay faithful. God gives everything back. A nice little parable about waiting your turn. That is not what the book actually says. The book of Job is 42 chapters of raw anger, existential crisis, and a man screaming at God for answers that never come. It is the most philosophically demanding book in the entire Bible. And the lesson at its center is one most Christians spend their whole lives trying to avoid. Half of you are going to disagree with me by the end of this video. You're going to hit the comments to tell me I got it wrong. Good. Because this story was never meant to comfort you. It was meant to wake you up. And to understand why, we have to go back to where it all started, not on earth, in heaven. The Bible opens the book of Job with a scene so strange, so unsettling, that if it weren't inspired scripture, you'd think someone made it up. But before we enter the throne room, you need to know who Job was and when he lived, because the timing of this story matters more than almost anyone realizes. In the land of Uz, there was a man whose name was Job, the land of Uz, a place that appears on no modern map, somewhere east of Canaan, a region that existed before Israel was a nation, before the law was given, before the temple was built, before Abraham was even born. Job was not a Jew. He was not an Israelite. He was not part of any chosen people, because there was no chosen people yet. He was something older, something primal, a man from the dawn of civilization who somehow knew God personally, before God had made his formal covenant with any nation on earth. This is why Job matters to the whole world. He is not a Jewish story, or a Christian story, or a Muslim story. He is a human story. He is the first recorded attempt in all of Scripture to answer the question every person who has ever lived has asked, why me? The Bible is very careful about how it introduces him, blameless, upright, one who feared God and turned away from evil. The Hebrew word is tam, complete, whole, without moral blemish. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters. He had 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and very many servants. He was the greatest man of all the people of the East. Think about that for a second. Not one of the greatest. The greatest. There was nobody like him, morally or materially, on the face of the planet. Let me give you numbers you can actually picture. 7,000 sheep is a flock that would stretch to the horizon in every direction. 3,000 camels in the ancient world was the wealth of a small kingdom. 500 yoke of oxen meant Job owned more plowing power than most nations combined. 500 donkeys meant he controlled regional trade routes. This was not a rich man. This was a dynasty. And every single morning before the sun came up, Job would rise and offer sacrifices for his children, just in case. Just in case one of them had cursed God in their hearts at a party the night before. This was a man who took spiritual protection so seriously that he atoned for sins that might not have even been committed. He did this continually, the text says, day after day after day, for decades. If there was a man on earth who had earned a life of peace, it was Job, and that is exactly why God was about to destroy it. Now watch what happens in chapter 1, verse 6, because this is the scene most people have never actually read. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Let me slow down on that sentence. Satan, the adversary, the accuser, walking into the throne room of God, not locked in hell, not in chains, not banished, invited, standing among the sons of God, the heavenly court, in the presence of the Almighty himself. This alone should shake you. The book of Job reveals a spiritual reality that most modern Christians have been trained to ignore, that Satan still has access, that he stands before God and accuses, that there is a court in heaven where cases about human beings are argued, and that sometimes the accuser wins the right to attack. God said to Satan, "From where have you come?" Satan answered, "From going to and fro on the earth and from walking up and down on it." He was patrolling, surveying, looking for souls to destroy. And then God did something that makes theologians uncomfortable 3,000 years later. He bragged, "Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil." God pointed Job out. God put him on Satan's radar. Read that again. Job was not targeted because he had sinned. He was not targeted because he had slipped up. He was targeted because God himself drew Satan's attention to him. And Satan fired back with the question that has haunted every believer for 3,000 years. Does Job fear God for nothing? That is the bet right there. 8 words that start the entire book. Satan's argument was simple and devastating. Of course, Job worships you. Look at his life. You've blessed him. You've protected him. You've made him rich beyond imagining. You've put a hedge around him and his family and everything he owns. Strip him of all of it, and he will curse you to your face. In other words, Job's faith isn't real. It's bought. And here is where the story becomes terrifying, because God did not say no. God said, "Behold, all that he has is in your hand. Only against him do not stretch out your hand." God gave Satan permission to destroy a man who had done nothing wrong. To prove a point, let that settle in before we keep going. This is the uncomfortable truth at the heart of the book of Job. God was not absent when Job suffered. God was not surprised when Job suffered. God authorized it, with specific limits, yes. But he authorized it. And Job was never told why. For the rest of his life, Job would never learn about this conversation. He would never know about the bet. He would beg God for an explanation, and the explanation we are reading right now is the one God deliberately chose not to give him. Remember that, because it is going to matter more than anything else in this story. Satan left the throne room, and back on earth, on an ordinary morning, Job had no idea that his life was about to end. His oldest son was hosting a feast that day. All 10 of Job's children were gathered in one house, eating, drinking, laughing, as they did every week. Job had 10 grown children who still chose to spend time together. That alone tells you what kind of father he was. And then the messengers came. The structure of what follows is so precise, so deliberate, that it reads like a horror film. 4 messengers, each one arriving while the previous one is still speaking. 4 pieces of news, each one worse than the last. The first messenger burst in, dust on his robes, out of breath. The oxen were ploughing, and the donkeys were feeding beside them, when the Sabaeans fell upon them and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. The Sabaeans were a tribe of raiders, professional thieves. In one morning, Job's entire agricultural operation had been wiped out. Every ox, every donkey, every servant in the fields, dead or captured. Before Job could process what he had heard, the second messenger arrived. The fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants and consumed them, and I alone have escaped to tell you. 7,000 sheep, gone. Struck by what the survivor calls the fire of God, meaning lightning on an unnatural scale. An entire mountainside of flocks reduced to ash. Before that messenger had even finished, the third ran in. The Chaldeans formed 3 groups and made a raid on the camels, and took them and struck down the servants with the edge of the sword, and I alone have escaped to tell you. The Chaldeans were raiders from a completely different direction than the Sabaeans. For both tribes to strike on the same day, from opposite sides of the compass, at the same household, was statistically impossible, but it happened. And then came the fourth. Think about Job standing there. He had already lost his oxen, his donkeys, his servants, his sheep, his camels, everything he had built over a lifetime, gone in 3 sentences. But all of that was just property. All of that could be rebuilt. All of that was survivable. And then the fourth messenger spoke. Your sons and daughters were eating and drinking wine in their oldest brother's house, and behold, a great wind came across the wilderness and struck the 4 corners of the house, and it fell upon the young people, and they are dead, and I alone have escaped to tell you. All 10, I want you to stop and actually sit with this moment. Because every sermon I have ever heard on Job rushes past it, but Job did not rush past it. Job lived inside it. Let me walk you through what Job walked through next. He tore his robe, he shaved his head, both ancient signs of mourning so violent they left scars, and then he walked to the house. Picture this: the wealthiest man in the East, in the robes he had just torn, walking alone across the desert to the ruins of his oldest son's home. Behind him, fields of burning sheep. In front of him, a pile of stone and timber where his entire family had been eating an hour earlier. He would have had to dig through the rubble, by himself, or with the one surviving servant, looking for faces, for hands, for anything he could recognize. He would have pulled out his oldest son first, the one who had been hosting the feast, the one who had invited everyone, then his daughter-in-law, then the next brother, then the next. 10 of them, in one pile, the wine they had been drinking, still open on the shattered tables, the food still on their plates, the conversations they had been having, cut off mid-sentence. Imagine identifying your own child under a collapsed roof, then imagining 9 more, one after another, until every face you had kissed goodnight for decades was lying in front of you, cold. We do not know how long he was there. The Bible does not tell us, but we know what he did when he came back. Then Job arose and tore his robe and shaved his head and fell on the ground and worshipped. He worshipped, not screamed, not cursed, not ran into the desert to die. He fell on his face in the dust, in the blood of his children, and worshipped. And he said one of the most famous sentences in the entire Bible. Naked I came from my mother's womb, and naked shall I return. The Lord gave, and the Lord has taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. In all this, Job did not sin or charge God with wrong. Round 1 to Job. But Satan was not done. Back in heaven, the sons of God presented themselves before the Lord a second time, and Satan came with them. And God pointedly brought up Job again. Have you considered my servant Job? There is none like him on the earth, a blameless and upright man who fears God and turns away from evil. He still holds fast his integrity, although you incited me against him to destroy him without reason. Without reason. God himself says the words, Job suffered without reason. And Satan answered with his second accusation. Skin for skin. All that a man has he will give for his life. But stretch out your hand and touch his bone and his flesh, and he will curse you to your face. Sure, Satan said, Job accepted losing his family, but physical suffering is different. Make him hurt in his own body, and he will break. And God said, Behold, he is in your hand, only spare his life. And so Satan struck Job with boils from the sole of his foot to the crown of his head. The text is graphic. Job took a piece of broken pottery and scraped his own sores with it. He sat in a pile of ashes outside the city, which is where lepers and the unclean lived in the ancient world. He was exiled from his own community. His skin turned black. His body swelled. Worms crawled in his open wounds. He could not sleep. He could not eat. He could not even recognize himself in a mirror. His breath stank so badly that his own family could not come near him. His bones ached through the night. His skin cracked and oozed. He tells us, later in the book, that his eyes had grown dim with weeping, that his body had become so thin he was nothing but skin stretched over bone. And this is when his wife finally broke. She had lost the same 10 children. She had lost the same wealth. She had lost the same dignity. And now she was watching her husband rot in front of her eyes, covered in pus, stinking of death, sitting in garbage outside the city walls. She said to him, "Do you still hold fast your integrity? Curse God and die." In her defense, that might be the most honest thing anyone says in the entire book. She was done. She wanted the pain to end. She had been surviving on one thread of hope, and that thread was her husband's faith. If he would just let go, at least it would be over. And Job, still sitting in his ashes, still scraping his sores, still bleeding, answered her with a question that has echoed for 3,000 years. Shall we receive good from God, and shall we not receive evil? In all this, Job did not sin with his lips. Round 2 to Job. But his real test had not even begun. Because 3 men were about to arrive. 3 men who would do more damage to Job's faith than Satan ever did. His friends, Eliphaz the Temanite, Bildad the Shuhite, Zophar the Naamathite. 3 wise men from neighboring lands who had heard about Job's tragedy and agreed to meet him in the ashes. Each of them was famous in his own right. Eliphaz came from Teman, a region known throughout the ancient world for producing philosophers and sages. Bildad came from a family line with a reputation for understanding tradition. Zophar was the youngest, known for blunt truth. These were not random villagers. These were the smartest, most respected men of their generation. The ones you called when you needed wisdom. And when they arrived, they did something remarkable. Something that almost redeems the rest of what they say later. They saw him from far off, and they did not recognize him. He was that disfigured. His skin was so blackened, his body so swollen, that his 3 closest friends could not identify him until they were close enough to see his eyes. They tore their robes, they sprinkled dust on their heads, they fell to the ground beside him, and then they did the most powerful act of friendship in the entire Bible. For 7 days and 7 nights they said nothing. They just sat there, in the ashes, beside him, in silence. 7 days. 168 hours. Not a sermon, not a devotional, not a Bible verse, not a God has a plan, just presence. In Jewish tradition, this is actually the origin of the custom of sitting Shiva, the 7 days of silent mourning that is still practiced today, thousands of years later. No advice, no explanations, no theology. Just 3 friends in the dust, refusing to abandon a brother who was dying. If the book of Job had ended right there, it would have been a masterpiece. But it did not end there, because on day 8, Job spoke. And when he spoke, the 3 friends answered. And what came out of their mouths reveals something darker than Satan's attack. Job opened his mouth and cursed the day he was born. Let the day perish on which I was born, and the night that said, a man is conceived. Let that day be darkness. May God above not seek it, nor light shine upon it. He did not curse God. He cursed existence itself. Why did I not die at birth? Why did I not perish when I came out of the womb? For then I would have lain down and been quiet. I would have slept. Then I would have been at rest. This is not the patient Job of Sunday school. This is a man in the blackest pit of despair, wishing he had been stillborn rather than lived to see this day. And this is where Eliphaz decided to speak. What follows is not a conversation. It is an execution. Three of Job's closest friends spend the next 22 chapters systematically dismantling his faith while believing they are saving it. And the psychological damage they cause him is worse than the boils, worse than the dead children, worse than anything Satan did. Because Satan attacked his body. The friends attacked his soul. Eliphaz went first. He began gently. He reminded Job of how Job used to comfort others. But then he landed his actual point, and the point was a knife. Remember, who that was innocent ever perished? Where were the upright cut off? As I have seen, those who plow iniquity and sow trouble reap the same. Translation: innocent people do not suffer. If you are suffering, you must have sinned. Eliphaz's entire worldview was built on a simple equation. Good things happen to good people. Bad things happen to bad people. Therefore, Job, since bad things are happening to you, you must have done something bad. Confess it, repent, turn back to God, and He will restore you. This is what theologians call retributive theology. The idea that every reward and every punishment in life is a direct response to personal behavior. And it is a theology that has destroyed more faith than any heresy in history. Because it is a lie. But Eliphaz genuinely believed it, and so did Bildad, and so did Zophar, and so, it turns out, do most people, even today. You have probably thought this way yourself. When someone gets cancer, part of you wonders if their lifestyle contributed. When a marriage falls apart, part of you wonders if one of them was hiding something. When a child dies, part of you searches for the missing detail that would explain why. That is Eliphaz's theology, still alive in the 21st century. And you need to understand something. It is not harmless. It is not a theoretical debate. Eliphaz's theology, applied to a grieving man, is cruelty dressed up as wisdom. It is the voice of every friend who ever sat next to a broken person and said, "Well, have you prayed about it?" It is the voice of every church that whispered behind a divorced woman's back. It is the voice of every believer who looked at a family hit by tragedy and thought, "What did they do wrong?" Eliphaz is not a villain in the story. He is every one of us on our worst day. Bildad spoke next, and where Eliphaz appealed to personal experience, Bildad appealed to tradition. Inquire, please, of bygone ages and consider what the fathers have searched out. The ancients knew this. Good people prosper, evil people are destroyed. And then Bildad did something unforgivable. He looked at Job, the man whose 10 children were 3 weeks cold in the ground, and he said, "Your children died. Why? Because they must have sinned against God. He has delivered them into the hand of their transgression." Bildad blamed the deaths of Job's children on the children themselves, sitting across from their grieving father. Let that register. Bildad looked at a man who had just buried 10 kids and told him it was their fault. Then Zophar, the youngest and bluntest, took his turn, and Zophar went where even the other 2 had not gone. Know then that God exacts of you less than your guilt deserves. In other words, Job, you actually deserve worse than what is happening to you. Be grateful that God is being this merciful. Imagine sitting in a pile of ashes, your children dead, your body rotting, and having a man you have known for decades lean over and tell you that God is going easy on you. And Job did what any breathing human would do. He lost his mind. What follows is a cycle of speeches that goes on for 20 chapters. The friends speak. Job answers. The friends speak again. Job answers again. The friends try a third time. Job destroys them. And through all of it, Job is doing something none of the friends can do. He is talking directly to God. He is not cursing God. He is not denying God. He is arguing with God. Know then that God has put me in the wrong and closed his net about me. Behold, I cry out, violence, but I am not answered. I call for help, but there is no justice. Why do you hide your face and count me as your enemy? Oh, that I knew where I might find him, that I might come even to his seat. I would lay my case before him and fill my mouth with arguments. Job wants a trial. He wants to stand in court and face God and demand an explanation. He is so certain of his own innocence that he is willing to take God himself to the witness stand. Let me have my say, and then let the Almighty answer me. Let my adversary write out my indictment. I would wear it as a crown on my head. Pause on that line. Read it again. Job is telling God, write down your charges against me, and I will wear them like a crown. He believes in his own innocence so strongly that he thinks the very indictment will clear him. And this is where the book becomes explosive. Because in the middle of one of these speeches, Job says something that changes the trajectory of religious thought forever. Oh, that my words were written. Oh, that they were inscribed in a book. Oh, that with an iron pen and lead, they were engraved in the rock forever. He literally asks that his testimony be preserved, etched into stone, made permanent, so that centuries from now, someone, anyone, would hear his case. And then he says the line that theologians have been wrestling with for 3,000 years. For I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will stand upon the earth. And after my skin has been thus destroyed, yet in my flesh I shall see God. Stop. 2,000 years before Christ was born, a man covered in boils, sitting in ashes, dying, with rotting skin and broken bones. And out of his mouth comes a prophecy so precise it reads like it was written by a New Testament apostle. My Redeemer lives. At the last, he will stand upon the earth. After my skin has been destroyed, in my flesh, I will see God. A Redeemer, on the earth, after death, resurrection. Job, in his darkest hour, prophesies the coming of Jesus Christ, 2 millennia in advance. He does not know it. He does not understand it. He is just groping in the dark, reaching for hope. And what comes out of his mouth is one of the most staggering prophecies in the Old Testament. Something in this man refused to die, even when everything else had. The three friends went silent. They could not answer him. They had run out of arguments. And that is when a fourth man stepped forward, a young man who had been listening the whole time. Elihu. Elihu is a strange character. Scholars cannot figure out why he is in the book at all. His speeches do not resolve anything. God does not address him directly, and yet he gets 4 full chapters. Elihu's argument is different from the other 3. He does not say Job sinned. He says God is using suffering to teach Job, to discipline him, to grow him. Pain, according to Elihu, is a tool God uses to refine his people. And Elihu has a point. He is closer to the truth than the first 3, but he is still missing the biggest piece. Because even Elihu assumes there is a reason for Job's suffering, that God is responding to something, that if Job just understood the purpose, the pain would make sense. But Job's suffering has no purpose he can know. The reason is a bet in heaven that God will never disclose to him. Not in this life, not ever. And just as Elihu finishes speaking, the sky begins to change. The light dims. The wind picks up. Dust spirals in the distance. A storm is gathering over the land of Uz. Not a normal storm. Something different. Something alive. The animals in the fields scatter. The shepherds run for cover. The 3 friends look up from the ashes, see what is coming, and fall silent. The clouds stack on top of each other. Black, towering, churning. And in the middle of them, a column of wind begins to descend. A whirlwind, a tornado of cloud and thunder and lightning, spiraling down toward the earth, toward Job. The friends back away. They have never seen anything like this. Some of them fall on their faces, others run. But Job does not move. He sits in his ashes, skin oozing, eyes dim, bones aching, and he watches the whirlwind come for him. For 38 chapters, he has been demanding a meeting with God. For 38 chapters, he has been rehearsing his legal case. For 38 chapters, he has been preparing his arguments, and now, at last, God has shown up. But not to answer Job's questions. God has shown up to ask his own. Out of the whirlwind, a voice, not a whisper, not a suggestion, a voice that shakes the ground. Who is this that darkens counsel by words without knowledge? Dress for action like a man. I will question you, and you make it known to me. God is not going to answer Job. God is going to cross-examine him. And what follows is the longest speech God gives in the entire Bible. 4 chapters, over 70 questions, not a single one answered by Job. Where were you when I laid the foundation of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know. Or who stretched the line upon it? On what were its bases sunk? Or who laid its cornerstone, when the morning stars sang together, and all the sons of God shouted for joy? God is taking Job through creation itself, asking him if he was there when the universe was built, if he understands the physics of light, the mechanics of the ocean, the birth of the stars. Have you commanded the morning since your days began? Have you caused the dawn to know its place? Have you entered into the springs of the sea, or walked in the recesses of the deep? Where is the way to the dwelling of light, and where is the place of darkness? Job tries to answer. He cannot. His mouth will not work. The voice keeps coming. Who has cleft a channel for the torrents of rain and a way for the thunderbolt? Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades or loose the cords of Orion? Can you lead forth the constellations in their seasons? Can you make it rain? Can you call the lightning? Can you arrange the stars? Do you know when the mountain goats give birth? Can you number the months that they fulfill? Have you given the horse his might? Do you clothe his neck with a mane? Do you make him leap like the locust? Can you design an animal? Can you put wings on a hawk? Can you teach an eagle to hunt? This is not a gentle conversation. This is God absolutely overwhelming Job with the scale of reality, the weather, the seas, the stars, the animals, the wild goats, the ostriches, the warhorse, the eagle, the hawk. 70 questions, not a single pause, not a single breath. The voice does not let up. And then, just when Job thinks it cannot get more intense, God introduces 2 creatures that have puzzled readers for 3,000 years, Behemoth and Leviathan. Behold Behemoth, which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold his strength in his loins and his power in the muscles of his belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze, his limbs like bars of iron. Some scholars say Behemoth was a hippopotamus, others say a dinosaur, some say a mythological creature representing primordial chaos. The description is so extreme that no known animal fits perfectly. A tail like a cedar tree, bones like bronze tubes, a creature so powerful that, the text says, he is the first of the works of God. And then Leviathan, even worse. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fishhook? Can you press down his tongue with a cord? Can you put a rope in his nose or pierce his jaw with a hook? His sneezings flash forth light, and his eyes are like the eyelids of the dawn. Out of his mouth go flaming torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Out of his nostrils comes forth smoke as from a boiling pot. His breath kindles coals, and a flame comes forth from his mouth. A sea monster that breathes fire. God spends an entire chapter describing this creature. When he raises himself up, the mighty are afraid. The sword that reaches him does not avail, nor the spear, the dart, or the javelin. He counts iron as straw, and bronze as rotten wood. On earth there is not his like, a creature without fear. Humans with weapons cannot hurt Leviathan. Nothing on earth is his equal. And God says, I made him, I control him. I have just been describing him to you as if describing a pet. These 2 creatures are not random zoology lessons. They are God's final argument. They represent everything humans cannot tame, everything beyond our control, chaos itself, wearing flesh. And God is saying to Job, look at these. I made them. I control them. I know things about the depths of creation that you cannot even imagine, and you want to question how I run the universe. And Job finally breaks, not in despair this time, in surrender. I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you. Therefore I despise myself and repent in dust and ashes. Watch those words carefully, because they contain the greatest lesson this book has to offer. I have heard of you. but now I see you." Before the suffering, Job knew about God. He had heard, he had been taught, he had followed the rules, he had made the sacrifices, he had done everything right. But he did not know God. He knew about God. And after 42 chapters of suffering, arguing, grieving, and finally being confronted by a whirlwind, Job now knows God. And here is the part that will break you if you let it. God never tells Job about the bet. Never. Not in the whirlwind. Not after Job repents. Not in the restoration. Never in the entire rest of Job's life does he find out why he suffered. He does not learn about Satan's accusation. He does not learn that his faithfulness was being tested on a cosmic scale. He does not learn that he was the evidence in a case being tried in the courtroom of heaven. He just gets God, and that is the greatest lesson of faith ever told. Faith is not about getting answers. Faith is about continuing to trust when the answer never comes. Faith is showing up in the ashes, asking the questions, screaming at the sky, and still, at the end, accepting God without the explanation you thought you deserved. Because here is the pattern that runs through the entire Bible. The people God loves most are almost never told why they are suffering. Joseph, sold by his brothers into slavery at 17, imprisoned on a false accusation, 13 years of suffering, never told why. He eventually figures out the purpose decades later, but in the moment he just has to trust. Abraham, told to sacrifice his only son, the son of the promise, the one God had miraculously given him in his old age. Why? The text never says. Abraham walks up the mountain with a knife, and God never explains why he asked. David, hunted by Saul for years, hiding in caves, sleeping in the wilderness, psalm after psalm of agony. Why? Not told. Jeremiah, rejected by his own people, thrown in a cistern, forced to watch Jerusalem burn. Why? Not told. Paul, thorn in the flesh, begged God 3 times to remove it. God said, "My grace is sufficient for you," and never explained what the thorn was or why it was there. And the one most people forget, Jesus, on the cross, screaming to the sky, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And no answer came. The Son of God himself, at the worst moment of human history, asked the question Job asked, and heard the same silence. This is the pattern. This is the scandal of faith. The heroes of the Bible, the ones we hold up as examples, mostly did not get their answers in this life. They just got God. And now I need to tell you something that most pastors will never say from a pulpit. The book of Job is proof that you can argue with God. Not just quietly, not just respectfully. You can scream at him, you can accuse him, you can demand a trial, you can tell him he is being unfair, you can wish you had never been born, and he will not smite you. He will show up. Read that again. Job spent 20 chapters accusing God of injustice, of hiding, of persecuting him, of being cruel. And when God finally spoke, what did he say? He did not say, "You were wrong to be angry." He did not say, "You were wrong to argue." He did not say, "You should have been more patient." He said to the 3 friends, the ones who had defended God's justice the whole time, "My anger burns against you, for you have not spoken of me what is right, as my servant Job has." Let that land. God said the 3 theologically correct friends were wrong, and the grieving, raging, accusing Job was right. Why? Because the friends reduced God to a vending machine. Put in good behavior, get out blessings. Put in bad behavior, get out suffering. Their God was a formula, a contract, a system. But Job's God was a person you could argue with, a person you could scream at, a person you could be honest with, even in your rage. And Job, in all his messy, furious, desperate honesty, had related to God as a real being, not a machine. God prefers honest anguish to polite theology. This is the lesson the church has spent 2,000 years trying to soften, because it is inconvenient, because it means you cannot control God with good behavior, because it means the people in your pews who are bitter and hurting and angry are closer to true faith than the ones sitting quietly with folded hands. If you have been taught that your anger at God disqualifies you from His love, you have been lied to. Job is evidence. So God commands the 3 friends to bring 7 bulls and 7 rams and offer them as a sacrifice. And then, in an astounding turn, God says they must ask Job to pray for them, because He, God, will only accept the sacrifice if Job intercedes. Job, the man they had spent weeks blaming, has to be the one who prays for their forgiveness. And Job does it. He prays for them, and God accepts the sacrifice. Think about the maturity that took. After everything those 3 had said, after the blame, after the theology lectures, after weeks of being told he deserved his own tragedy, Job prayed for them. Without bitterness, without a sermon about how they had been wrong, he just prayed. And then something happens that most people treat as the happy ending, but that I think is actually the most haunting part of the whole book. And the Lord restored the fortunes of Job when he had prayed for his friends, and the Lord gave Job twice as much as he had before. Double. 14,000 sheep, 6,000 camels, 1,000 yoke of oxen, 1,000 donkeys, and 7 sons and 3 daughters. Exactly the same number as before. Not doubled, the same. Why? Because the original 10 children weren't lost. They were waiting. They were with God, and Job would see them again one day. So he did not need twice as many in this life. He needed the assurance that what he had lost was not erased. And the 3 daughters are named, this time, Jemima, which means dove, Kezia, which means cinnamon or fragrance, and Keren Happuch, which means horn of eye paint or beauty. The Bible notes that in all the land there were no women so beautiful as the daughters of Job. And their father gave them an inheritance among their brothers, which was almost unheard of in the ancient world. In ancient cultures, daughters did not inherit alongside sons. It simply did not happen. But Job, the man who had lost everything and been restored, broke the rules of his own time and gave his daughters a share of the family estate. He had learned something in the ashes about what actually mattered, and the old rules no longer held him. Job lived another 140 years after his restoration. He saw his sons and his sons' sons, 4 generations, and he died, an old man and full of days. But here is the detail that destroys the simple reading of the book. Job was never told about the bet, not when his fortunes returned, not when his new children were born, not on his deathbed at 200 years old. He went to his grave without ever knowing why the entire catastrophe had happened. And he was fine with that, because by the time his suffering ended, he had something better than the answer. He had seen God. Now let me tell you why this book matters more than you realize. The book of Job is almost certainly the oldest book in the Bible. Many scholars believe it was written before Moses, before the 10 Commandments, before the Exodus, before the covenant with Abraham was even fully formed. This was humanity's first attempt, preserved in Scripture, to answer the oldest question in the world. Why do good people suffer? And the answer was radical. The answer was, you do not need to know. Every religion after Job has struggled with this. Eastern religions say suffering is an illusion, or karma, or a cycle to be escaped. Western philosophy says suffering is proof there is no God. Modern self-help says suffering is something you can fix with the right mindset. The book of Job rejects all of it. Job says there is a God. He is good. He is all-powerful. Bad things do happen to good people, and you will not be told why, and that is okay. Because the goal of your life was never comfort, it was encounter. This is why the book is uncomfortable. This is why most sermons smooth it over, because it refuses to give us the one thing we want most: control. We want to know that if we do the right things, good things will happen. We want to know that if we pray hard enough, we can protect our families from tragedy. We want to know that our faith will insulate us from pain. Job says no. Your faith will not insulate you. Your prayers will not protect you from all suffering. You will experience loss that makes no sense, and God will not always tell you why, but He will meet you in it. Let me tell you what this means for you right now. watching this video. Maybe you have lost someone, a parent, a child, a spouse, a friend. And for years you have been asking why. Why them? Why now? Why this way? And you have heard nothing back. Maybe you have a diagnosis, a chronic illness, a body that has been breaking down on you for years, and you do not know why God is letting it continue. Maybe you have a marriage that fell apart through no fault of your own, a business that collapsed despite your best efforts, a child who rejected everything you taught them, a season of prayer where heaven feels like a brick wall. Job understands. Job sat in ashes for most of a book, scraping his own sores, surrounded by friends who blamed him, married to a wife who begged him to give up. And for most of that book, God was silent. But the silence did not mean God was absent. The silence meant God was preparing a different kind of answer, not an explanation, not a lecture on theodicy, an encounter. When God finally spoke, he did not explain why. He showed up, and that was enough. There is one more thing you need to see before we close. When Job's restoration happens, the text says, his brothers and sisters and all who had known him before came to his house. They ate bread with him. They comforted him and consoled him for all the evil that the Lord had brought upon him. Did you catch that line? The evil that the Lord had brought upon him. The Bible itself, in its final verses about Job, acknowledges that what happened to him was evil, and it attributes that evil in some sense to God. Not because God does evil, but because in the mystery of his sovereignty, he permitted what Satan did. He authorized it. He drew the lines. He set the limits. And that is the final, uncomfortable truth of the book of Job. God is in charge of everything, including the storms, including the thieves, including the collapsing house, including the disease. He does not cause evil, but he is not absent from it, and he is never surprised by it. He is working something deeper than you can see. And sometimes you will not know what it is. Not in this life. Maybe not ever. But you will see him. If you hold on, if you keep showing up in the ashes, if you keep asking the questions, even when no answers come, you will see him. So was it worth it? Was Job's suffering worth what he got? I will tell you what I think, and you can disagree in the comments. Job lost 10 children, his health, his wealth, decades of his life to unexplained agony. And in exchange, he got a face-to-face encounter with God, a testimony preserved for 3,000 years, a book that has comforted billions of sufferers, and a seat at the table of the faithful that will last for eternity. He probably would not have chosen it. Nobody would. But by the end, he did not regret it. And somewhere in heaven, right now, he is reunited with the 10 children he buried. And he knows. He finally knows about the bet. He knows why it happened. He knows what was at stake. And you know what I think he says? When he sees the whole picture, I think he says it was worth it. Not because the pain stopped hurting, not because the grief went away, but because he is standing in the presence of the living God, and nothing will ever separate him from that again. That is the greatest lesson of faith ever told. Not that suffering has a purpose you can understand, not that God explains himself when you ask. Not that good people are protected from loss, but that even in the worst of it, if you do not let go, you will meet the living God. And meeting him will rewrite everything you thought you knew about your own story. 3,000 years after Job sat in his ashes, his story is still being read, still being preached, still being wept over in hospitals and funeral homes and quiet bedrooms at 3 in the morning by people who thought they were alone. That is Job's real legacy. Not the restored flocks, not the beautiful daughters, not the long life. It is the fact that somewhere, right now, someone is reading his words and realizing for the first time that their pain does not mean God has abandoned them. Somewhere, right now, a man with boils on his soul is learning that it is okay to scream at the sky. That honest rage is closer to faith than polite denial. That God can take the full weight of your anger and still love you on the other side of it. Somewhere, right now, A mother who has buried a child is hearing Job say, "I have heard of you by the hearing of the ear, but now my eye sees you." And something in her chest is loosening, just slightly, for the first time in months. That is the power of this story. It is not just history, it is a mirror. It is a door. It is a hand reaching across 3,000 years to grab yours and say, "You are not crazy for asking. You are not faithless for grieving. You are not alone in your ashes." And he is coming. He is always coming. He came for Job. He will come for you. Your test may already be happening. Your ashes may already be under you. Your friends may already be telling you it is your fault. But if you hold on, if you refuse to let go, if you keep showing up, even when everything in you wants to curse and die, you will see him. And the bet, whatever bet is being made over your life right now in the courts of heaven, will be won. Not because you were strong, not because you had answers, but because you did not let go. That is the greatest lesson of faith ever told. And it was written for you. Next, I am telling the story of the man who had to pass the hardest test in the entire Bible. Harder than Job, harder than Moses, a man God asked to sacrifice his own son with his own hands. Abraham did not get an explanation either, and what he did on that mountain changed the course of human history forever. If you want to understand how far faith can go, that video is on your screen right now. Click it